So by the next 6 years, I don't know what's going to happen to me. But look, to stay sane, it's hard to say, without being there. But
Pretty rough.
It is rough, but you have to. I've always felt that I'm going to go out there and try and do the best job I can, and I enjoy helping people. That's why I got into public service to begin with. And as long as I don't take money from the gun lobby, I don't take money from the NRA, never have, and frankly, I'm not in this race. I'm not taking any corporate PAC money whatsoever. Having said that. When I talk to gun owners, and I have many friends who are gun owners, everyone wants to see some common sense reforms. Take an issue like expanded background checks, something that I support. I think that if there's a commercial sale of a firearm, there should be a background check. Okay, you shouldn't be able to go to a gun show or over the internet or a private sale that does not allow some kind of a background check for a person owning a firearm. Much of the gun violence that you see in New York State right now, and we have universal background checks in New York State, but much of the gun violence that you see in New York State is by firearms that are purchased legally from outside of the state, in states that have lax background check systems, and then brought into the state and sold illegally. I don't know any gun owner that wants that to continue, so we need to have expanded background checks. Some of the legislation that I just voted on in the state assembly, which I think we need to have a conversation about at the federal level, is how do we keep firearms out of the hands of criminals? How do we keep firearms out of the hands of the violently, mentally ill? How do we keep firearms out of the hands of people who commit domestic abuse? So we just voted on a bill which passed both houses in the state legislature to ban someone convicted of domestic abuse from owning a firearm. Much of the violence against women that you see perpetrated is because of a firearm, and I don't think someone who's convicted of domestic abuse should own a firearm. We need to have extreme risk protection orders. This is a bill that we just voted on in the state assembly that I supported. So if someone is an extreme risk, a family member should be able to petition the court, or law enforcement should be able to petition the court to have firearms removed from that household so they cannot go out and commit a crime. We talk about people on terrorist watch lists being able to purchase firearms. I don't think that should be able to happen. There's a lot of reforms that we need to talk about, have a discussion about, but unfortunately, because of all the money that's being pumped in to politics to try and influence this conversation, we can't get any kind of common sense reforms passed. And I think we can have those reforms and still respect the Second Amendment, still respect people's right to own firearms, because we live in a state, and we live in a part of the state where people, and I have many friends who own firearms, who like to hunt, who like to target practice, and in many rural communities own firearms to feel safer in their homes, and I respect that. What we don't want to have happen is those firearms getting into the hands of the wrong people, so they can commit mass shootings or they can commit other kinds of crimes.
Hi, Mr. Brindisi. Just to follow up on that, I appreciate your progressive views on gun violence, and I appreciate that you don't take any money from the NRA. But when I did a little research, I found that you have a very favorable A rating from the NRA, and to show young people in particular that you stand up to the gun lobby, if you were elected to Congress, would you support a federal ban on the assault weapons like the AR-15?
I will say probably the biggest reason that I have that rating is because I did not vote for the New York SAFE Act. And just to go back a little bit to give you guys my reasoning why I didn't support the SAFE Act was, SAFE Act was new gun safety legislation that was championed by Governor Cuomo after Sandy Hook. And it was introduced in a very quick manner after that tragedy happened. The typical aging requirement for us to be able to read legislation is 3 days in New York State. The governor waived that, so we literally had about 3 hours to read that bill. And that bill covered a number of areas. It covered mental health law, covered criminal procedure law, penal law, you name it. It was hundreds of pages. And I felt that I did not have enough time to be able to digest everything that was in that bill. And one of the concerns I had at the time was on the doorstep of my assembly district is Remington Arms, which employs over 1,000 people in the Mohawk Valley. And one of my major concerns was if we were going to limit the possession of certain kinds of firearms in the state, how would that impact their ability to manufacture? And I have to take these things into consideration before I vote on a bill that could potentially put a lot of people out of work, and those are good paying jobs. I went to a lawyer in the assembly and I remember asking the lawyer who helped draft the bill, how does this impact Remington? And they couldn't answer my question. So I felt in good conscience I could not support the legislation, even though there were many things I agreed in the legislation, and there was a lot of things I disagreed with in the legislation. You can still, even with the New York SAFE Act, you can still purchase an AR-15 in New York State. It's still legal to own. But the difference with this bill is you can't add certain types of features, like high-capacity magazines, which I don't support, to things like AR-15s. And I think that's where the focus has got to be, is getting things like high-capacity magazines off the streets so people can't commit mass carnage when they go out and commit these mass shootings.
To the tune of billions of dollars that we don't have, that we just reduced from the federal budget, endangering many programs, many domestic programs, many conservation programs, environmental programs into the future, but they were willing to fund that in exchange for DACA. Will you give us a commitment now that you will not vote to fund that wall?
Well, I won't give a commitment that I will not vote to fund a wall, because I think at the end of the day, we have to compromise and we have to get things done. And actually, funding for the wall even began before President Trump was in office. This is something that even happened under President Obama. So where it makes sense to cut down on illegal border crossings, I could support a wall. I think in many areas, if you listen to the experts, they'll say that it's not going to work, and we need to have other kinds of enhanced border security, whether it's through air or whatever, other technologies out there. But at the end of the day, I think we have to come up to a solution for these young people who were brought here, these DACA individuals. And if it means some compromise, we got to find compromise, because eventually we got to get things done. We can't continue down the path we're going.
All right, this is one of the questions that was submitted on a note card. Yeah. What can be done to help preserve small family dairy farms like the ones in this community?
So this is a great question, and something I'm learning a lot more, and it's pretty timely because I just took a tour of some farms, dairy farms in Oneida County 2 days ago. And we are at a crisis right now with our dairy farmers. And agriculture, I know New York State, when you get outside of New York State or even maybe downstate, New York State is not really looked at as an agricultural state. But it's one of our top industries, and dairy is our #1 agricultural product. But what's happening right now with milk prices, because they're so low, many dairy farmers are being forced to potentially go out of business. So we have to do something now. Are really geared against northeastern farmers, particularly New York State farmers, in favor of the big guys out in the Midwest, the big commodity farmers, soybean, corn, things like that, where we need to have a redirection where we can focus more of those policies and the funding on dairy farmers and those dairy farmers here in New York State. I've looked at some legislation. There's some legislation out there that Senator Gillibrand is pushing right now to have a floor in terms of dairy prices, and then if the price falls below that floor, there'd be some kind of insurance program similar to what you see in the corn, the soybean farmers that would be funded through the U.S. Treasury. But we don't want to lose these farms. I mean, farmers right now, there's no more credit that they can take. And when we lose these farms, it's going to impact not only the farms and our dairy industry, but it's going to impact the tractor supply company, the feed company. It's going to have ripple effects throughout our state, and dairy is such an important part of our industry. NY-22, this congressional district, 57% of it's considered rural. So there's a lot of farms in there, and we've seen a lot of them struggle. I was talking to one woman who just ended up closing her farm because they couldn't continue anymore. We don't want to see that. So we want to make sure that our dairy farmers are strong. We need to refocus direction on our northeastern farms and our dairy farmers. We need to look at legislation that will help them in times of peril, like we're in right now where prices are so low. It's, you know, the policies are all geared towards the big guys, where they should be geared more towards those smaller farms that are struggling right now. So I know Gillibrand is working very hard on some legislation. We have a farm bill that's being discussed at the federal level right now that I hope these things can be taken into account. There's a lot we can do out there, you know, drink whole milk. I've been telling people this. You know, we're all very health conscious, and I appreciate that, and we want to go towards almond milk, which is not really milk, or some other alternative. But whole milk, if you look at all the studies, you know, the fat content in milk is so great for brain development, helps cut down on Alzheimer's and other things. You got to have those good fats in your diet. And I'm not a nutritionist, so I'm sure there's a lot of people a lot more smarter than I am on this topic. But if you can buy whole milk, more of that profit's going to the dairy farmer. Support your local farms, and hopefully we can see some better policies coming out of Washington, and people are standing up for our northeastern farmers. You know, one of the criticisms I have of my opponent is when she had a chance to decide what committee she wanted to go on, she chose financial services, which is great, but the policies that she's been pushing and that committee has been pushing are really geared to benefit Wall Street, they're geared to benefit the big credit agencies, they're geared to benefit the hedge fund managers and the big banks. Not too many of those people reside in the 22nd Congressional District. We have a lot of farmers, and it'd be great to have someone on the agricultural committee. We have a lot of roads and bridges that are crumbling. It'd be great to have someone on the transportation committee. Not a committee where you're going to pad your pocket. And if you look at the money she's been taking in over the last year and a half, it's from Goldman Sachs and all the big banks, Wall Street and hedge funds, not people who have the best interest of folks here in New York 22 at heart, like our dairy farmers. So we need to have a representative who's speaking loudly and clearly on these issues, and not in the side of these big banks and conglomerates that are really driving policy down in Washington right now.
Mr. Brindisi, can you explain why those milk prices are why they're so low?
Well, I'm learning a lot more. Why they are so low is because there's a surplus out there of milk for various reasons. But again, because they're getting so low, we should be looking at some kind of a federal insurance program for our dairy farmers. We give all these subsidies out for these big commodities. One thing's very clear. One thing I've learned in my time in the assembly, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. You have to stand up and you have to be very vocal about these issues. Otherwise, your interests are just going to get glossed over. So I'm someone who's never been afraid to be a big mouth, and sometimes that is much in the dismay of leaders in Albany. But you got to have someone who's willing to speak up and talk about these issues. New York State should be looked at as an agricultural state. We should have some kind of advertising campaign. We used to have advertising campaigns and marketing campaigns for drinking milk and everything. Those have all gone away. The farmers are paying, they're telling me something like 15 cents or on every dollar has to go towards like the advertising. But I don't see any milk commercials anymore. I don't know where that money's going. They don't know either. But we got to have a stronger presence in Washington, speaking on behalf of dairy farmers here in New York State. Not just dairy farmers, vegetable growers, the whole gamut.
Just as a quick reminder, Max will be walking around with the note cards if anyone wants to write down any questions. So he'll be going up and down just like him down. Hand I saw over there.
I can talk without the microphone. Mr. Brindisi, one thing I'd like you to, I'm Steve Bartlett,
Call
I
me
live in Lebanon, and I am a dairy farmer.
Yes.
You know, we have laws in this country about price gouging. And, you know, you people in this room, if you knew what farmers are getting paid for their milk, you'd be hysterical when you go to the grocery store. We get 11 cents a pound for our milk. You ought to be able to buy milk all day for 99 cents a gallon.
Yeah.
There's a law that says that these processors can only make so much profit. You know, nothing's been done about that. If there was a rapist on campus, everybody'd be looking at him. You know, this happens daily and nobody says a word. What would you do about that?
Well, Steve, you just reminded me of our conversation down the hallway. Walmart.
Absolutely.
Walmart is
Absolutely.
opening a milk processing center in Indiana, which is going to crush smaller dairy farmers because they're going to own everything from the cow to the processing on to the distribution and the retail. unbelievable that these large corporations are gonna put dairy farmers in my state out of business so they could save a little more, make a little more profit. We had, you know, it's one of the biggest problems that I see in this country, and I was at a, you know, we talk about agriculture, we talk about anything, your bills, your cell phone bill, your cable bill, everything's going up. Everything's going up because we have people in Washington who are so beholden to these large corporations and are just allowing more and more consolidation of big cable companies and cell phone and energy and everything because of the money in politics. And I harp on this issue, but it's so important because no matter what your concern is, environment, ag, taxes, whatever, there are people spending millions and millions of dollars to influence the conversation now in Washington, and they're doing it to their benefit, not yours.
It's an interesting thing. You said you wanted to know about the milk business. Give Hillary Clinton a call.
All right.
She did very, very well. I met with her when I was on the Farm Bureau. Many times, she knows the milk business inside and out. She's a very bright woman, and things were good when she was in Senate. For the
I think you're
farmers.
going to be on my ag policy committee, I think. We got the first step.
This topic of dairy farms is very important, but one constituents, part of the dairy workers sometimes don't get talked about are the immigrants.
Yes.
Who make up part of this, and are right now living under draconian laws. And I want to know, what are you going to do to help make sure they're protected? These people are living in fear of deportation. Some of them are undocumented, some of them aren't, but still under.
There's no food, right? You've seen states try to crack down on immigration, and you see the industry that's hurt the most is agriculture. You see it's happening in some of the southern states. I can't remember, it was Arkansas or Alabama. After they decided to really tamp down on immigration, farmers couldn't find workers to work on the farm, and that hurt their agricultural community and industry. We have to make sure that we're allowing a system of visas where people can come in to work on the farms. The farmers that I talked to actually the other day said many of these folks are coming from Guatemala or other countries. They don't want to stay here. They want to come to work, they want to make a good living, and they want to be able to go back to their families and help support their families.
And some of the support services that our farmers use to help support us. I wanted to see if you could comment that on the support that we get from our educational institutions.
Well, I think I could kind of touch generally, because this is another issue that came up when I was meeting with some of the farmers on how we can better support, how the state, how the federal government can better support our farmers. You know, we have, I'll give you an example, New York City public school system, okay? One of the biggest, if not biggest, public school systems in the country. A lot of the stuff they're buying is not coming from local in-state farms. Think how much we could benefit, you know, instead of having that old upstate, downstate divide, here's an area where we can actually work together, you know, help our vegetable growers, our fruit growers, our dairy farmers, supply places in New York City who, as we push more and more towards local, how more local can you get than upstate New York and New York City? So we gotta have policies in place in all of our education institutions where we try to promote that kind of behavior. The other issue too, and you could probably help educate me a little bit more on this, you know, as we are talking about this farm bill that's being debated, and a big part of the farm bill is food stamps. It seems like food stamps, from what I understand, a lot of it's geared towards processed foods, where there should be more emphasis on fresh fruits, fresh vegetables, to be able to use your food stamps for, and that will help promote a healthier lifestyle and promote our farms, which are going to be the ones growing this stuff. So, you know, that's something I hope that they consider a lot more in this farm bill, is more emphasis on health and nutrition, getting away from some of the processed foods that will then help farmers, our fruits and vegetable growers.
We're going to do a couple questions from the cards, then we'll go back to the handwritten.
This question asks, will you fight Trump and the GOP to make sure we all get universal health care?
So on universal health care, can you hear it? Oh, sorry. A rigorous process to be able to come into this country, to gain, yeah, you know, 2 years or more with all kinds of vetting that they have to go through. And most just want to live peaceful lives, work, become American citizens. There's nothing like going to one of those naturalization ceremonies and seeing all the different countries on the list of candidates who are being naturalized. Brings a tear to your eye because, look, my grandparents came here from Italy. My grandfather,
You see that as your role?
I see it as my role, I see it as everybody's role. If you can,
When you're elected?
yes, well, absolutely. I'll go over here first, then.
The person I like to call #1term10, I think is getting increasingly worried that that is actually going to come true. And as she gets more worried, she puts her foot in her mouth, as we've seen over the last couple of months, in terrible ways. It's almost every 2 weeks she's saying something that is horrifying. It's gonna get worse. She has attacked your family. You just talked about your grandparents. She's done personal attacks at you, at your upbringing, at your family, at your father, at your grandparents. Please go high when she goes low. Don't let her get to you, because she's doing a disservice to herself in all that she's doing. So please stay positive as much as you can, and don't let the national parties come in with all their flyers near the end of this where they tend to get really negative. Don't let them do that. Stay high.
I told my son we're going to unplug the cable line from the television for the last couple of months of this election because I don't want to see all the commercials. But look, the negativity in politics is, I'm going to stay high, and I tried to demonstrate that throughout my time in the campaign. You know, initially when I first announced those attacks came out, and I said, look, this is the kind of rhetoric that's not going to help anyone get a job, not help anyone find health care, not the issues that people wake up in the morning and care about. So I'm going to stay high. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of outside influences because this is going to be a very competitive congressional race that are going to come in here. But
what can and what should be done about that?
right. Well, a few things, and I'm learning a lot more and more about this issue as we talk about student loan debts now. I think the last article I read was the second highest consumer debt in this country. It's crushing. Average amount of years is 21 years it takes to repay a student debt, hundreds of thousands of dollars. You know, when you have that much debt, you're more likely to rent than own a home. You're more likely to lease a car than buy something. So it has ripple effects across the economy. There's been some legislation proposed at the federal level that I think is a good idea, like allowing refinancing of federal student loan debt, setting the student interest rate more towards the prime rate as opposed to where it is right now to help bring down interest rates. Unfortunately, we have an education secretary who doesn't understand student loan debt whatsoever and is making it worse, because a lot of the regulations that were put in place under the Obama administration to crack down on these fees that these student loan debt companies charge are now growing. And we don't need additional fees on top of the student loan debt. And then you have other states which are passing laws to take.
Philosophical question. What your philosophy is on the role of government in our society. For a generation or more, we've been hearing that government is not the solution, government is the problem. We've been hearing that the government is the enemy of the American people. We've been hearing talk about deconstructing the administrative state.
Deep state?
What is your philosophy on the role of government and our common good?
Great programs that help people with their daily lives. Government should play a role and should play a more expanded role in helping people deal with those issues. So I don't like the attacks. I was always brought up to believe in public service. And it was a good thing to want to go into public service because it's a difficult job and you want good people to be able to do it. And I fear we're getting to a point where we have demonized government and public service so much that good people don't even want to go into this anymore because they're thinking to themselves, why would I want to even subject myself to that? That's part of the reason why I decided to run for office. I said, look, I'm going to do it. I'll subject myself to it because I think I can help. And I think we need more people with a good head on their shoulders who can go down to Washington and actually get things done. I think government's capable of getting things done if you have the right people there running the government. And right now, we don't have the right people that are running the government. We did a hearing about this. I remember a young man who came to the hearing, who was from the Dominican Republic, had come to Utica with his family, and he was telling us a story about how he wanted to get into the building trades. He'd become very friendly with the local building trade groups, and they saw a lot of promise in this young man. They wanted to get him into their apprenticeship program. The problem is he couldn't get into the apprenticeship program because he had to have his high school diploma, and he couldn't get his high school diploma because he dropped out because he failed the Global Studies Regents 5 times. Now, to me, this makes no sense. And I'm a history major, no disrespect to history majors here, but if we have an exam that someone is struggling with and there's another way to get them to the end result, getting a diploma so they can get into a good career in the trades, earning good money, then we need to find ways to make that happen. So I was able to convince the Board of Regents to adopt this career and technical education diploma pathway. They adopted other pathways as well at the same time. They created a STEM pathway, and an arts pathway, and a humanities pathway, and we had your traditional Regents pathway still. But the idea, and many states are doing this, and many countries have already done this, is that there are multiple ways to get to that goal of a high school diploma. So we can get kids, young people, into these good paying jobs. And even the studies that I have seen, even if you're going to go on to four-year school, some exposure to career and technical education leads to better performance in high school and later on in college. So even if you're not going to go into trades or manufacturing or whatever, healthcare, some exposure will lead to better outcomes down the road. So we passed that here in New York. We're still working. The funding is always an issue, critical, trying to bring good CTE teachers into our schools, trying to get schools that are in more rural communities to have the ability to put these programs in their schools. So that's always a challenge. We can do a lot more at the federal level to incentivize these programs. Ultimately, a lot of the stuff was spared, but in the Betsy DeVos education budget, she wanted to cut CTE programs, cut adult education programs that would lead students to these good paying jobs. And to me, this is where we need to make more of an effort. So funding for education is critical. 1/3 of the student body is classified as either English language learner or students with disabilities. Many of these kids are coming from very difficult backgrounds. They're homeless. Many are homeless. They live in one-parent home, no parent home, are shuffled around in and out of foster care. They have no shot at home. So the least we can do in government and as elected officials is make sure they got a shot when they get to school. And if we're allowing students to flounder in class size to 35 kids, I don't know a teacher that can teach the 35 kids, especially when you're trying to get some who are English language learners to be able to take a test that the federal government dictates they have to take within a year of being here. So this is, I don't want to say it's a silver bullet, but it is an answer that we need to help invest more in to help lift people out of poverty. And education is the key. So, multinational corporations and hedge fund managers and folks who frankly didn't need a tax cut, we're now struggling to meet the nation's infrastructure needs. We're struggling to meet educational needs. Watch out Social Security and Medicare, which I can't stand when Paul Ryan calls it entitlement reform, because to me, those programs were a promise made to people, an earned benefit that should never be touched by the likes of Paul Ryan.
How do you remove the permanency of the Reform Act, the Tax Reform Act? They say it's permanent, 20%. How do you pay for something unless you raise corporate taxes?
Well, I think we could, if they actually sat down and talked to Democrats and we had a true bipartisan tax bill, I think they could have still got a lowering of the corporate tax rate, maybe not as much as they wanted. And we could have done repatriation, things that had to get done without such of an emphasis on gearing the tax cuts to the wealthiest individuals out there. But we got to look at all this when we change hands in Congress, and we'll see what happens when we have a new Congress next year. So by the next 6 years, I don't know what's going to happen to me. But look, to stay sane, it's hard to say, without being there. But
It's pretty rough.
It is rough, but you have to. I've always felt that I'm gonna go out there and try and do the best job I can. And I enjoy helping people. That's why I got into public service to begin with. And as long as
Checks are. Checks are welcome.
Well, first, how can you help the campaign if you want to get involved in the campaign? There's lots of things that you can do, and everyone has unique talents that they can bring to this campaign. We're going to need lots of volunteers. I always kind of chuckle when my opponent says she's the underdog. I'm running in a district that has a voter enrollment advantage towards her against an incumbent who sits on a very powerful financial services committee and has the ability to raise lots and lots of money. And will have a lot of influence from outside super PACs spending on her behalf. So I'm the underdog in this campaign, but I'm gonna need people. And I think the people are gonna be the difference in this campaign, and I see the people not happy with the direction of our current representative in the way she's been not representing us in Washington. So if you're willing to volunteer, to knock on doors, to make phone calls, to hold a house party for me that I'll come to, gather 25 of your friends, neighbors, I'm happy to do all that stuff. I want to go to every corner of this district, and I want to talk to Democrats, I want to talk to Republicans, I want to talk to independents, because I want to tell them why I think I can do a better job in Washington than our current representative. So if you have friends and neighbors that aren't convinced, have them over your house, and I'll show up and I'll convince them. That's what
In every part of this district, there are grassroots organizations that have been formed, most of them in the last year. A couple of them are helping to sponsor this group. So all you need to do is reach out to one of these groups. There are education meetings about how you do canvassing, how you do get out the vote, how you do voter registration, how you do phone banks. So you can work through the campaign, but you can also work through all of these groups in your local areas that are working as their this year objective to elect this man. So there's a number of ways to do it, and I encourage you to reach out to the grassroots groups.
Absolutely.
So thank you everybody for coming. I think we got